Hello, File here. Today we're going to build an image slider that works well in welcome messages. Let's get into it. Alright, here we go. We have a basic slider working now that will just cycle through images every 10 seconds. So here's how it works. First off, we want to look for every element that has a slider container class, and we will assume that if you have that in here, it's just a bunch of images, though you technically could use other elements. Now for each of the elements of this slider class that we find, because you can have more than one per page, we want to see, okay, how many children does it have? If there's less than 2, then that means there's 1 or 0, and there's no point in turning this into a slider because there wouldn't be anything to cycle between. So just return. Now we check, do any of the elements in here have a visible class? The visible class is how we track what element we're on, and if none of them have it, let's just default to adding the visible class to the first child in this slider. Now setInterval will call a function on an interval. In this case, we want to call this function every 10 seconds, or 10 times 1000 milliseconds. And in this function, we want to figure out, okay, what's the old image? Figure out what the next image is. It'll either be the next image in the list, so if this was the visible image, then this would be the next image. Or if this one was the next image, the next element sibling here would be null, which is falsy in JavaScript. That's why we have the or. We get the first element so that it loops back to the start. Now for the old image, we just want to remove the visible class because we don't need that anymore, and add the visible class to the new image. That's all it is for this. You just run this in a loop and cycle through. If you want it to change every 3 seconds instead of every 10 seconds, you just need to change that. And now the images will cycle through every 3 seconds. Let's see if we can make this a little bit nicer to use, though. Okay, here's a bit more of an advanced slider. This one has buttons so that the user can decide, oh, I want to go to the next page, or oh, I want to go to the previous page. I've added the blue background just so you can see where the left and right buttons are positioned compared to the container. And let's go over the CSS to make this happen. First off, we need to increase the width of our container by twice the width of the buttons that we want to use. I've gone ahead and centered the slider just because that's generally what you want in a welcome message, and I've added a blue background just to make it easier to see how big this actually is. The overflow hidden is not actually necessary in this case because all of the images are exactly 200 by 100, but it's probably a good idea for any other type of image. Now, the positioning has changed a little bit. First off, we had to add a relative positioning to the container, and this is to prevent any of our absolute positioning ending up here in the corner of the white box. Absolute positioning basically takes an element and says, I will put you where you should go. Don't try to figure it out yourself. And then the element says, okay, and we'll just go up to the top left corner of your screen or to the top left corner of the relative parent. So this has changed a few things. First off, our images are now all in the center. We needed to nudge them to the left by the width of our button, which is again 40 pixels. We've also added previous and next control buttons. Now we wanted these centered, so 50% down the page minus 20 pixels. 20 pixels was chosen because that's the font size I'm using. If you change the font size or if you change to some other type of button, you'll need to change that. These must have the pointer cursor declaration because otherwise when you're on a mobile device you won't be able to click it. And I position them absolutely because here we are changing the left position and the right position. This is from the left and right side of the container. 7 pixels was just chosen based on what looked right. You can feel free to play around with that. I'll go ahead and get rid of one of the sliders because you can see it clearly works with 2. We don't need more. All right, let's go through the code now. First off, I need to check if there's less than 4 elements. This is increased from 2 because we added 2 elements for the buttons. This is the same. We've extracted the number of seconds to show each image out into its own variable because we're going to use this in 2 different places. And we've added a last click variable that you'll see what this is for later. Now we've defined a next function which will just show the next image. This works the same as the code that was in the interval last time with one exception. Instead of just going to the first element, we can't do that anymore because it would get this element here. We have to find the first image. Now in the interval, we've added a check to make sure that we don't change the image if the user has clicked on either the previous button or the next button within the last seconds times 1000 milliseconds. This is because if you click on an image and then the interval fires to go to the next image, you probably don't want it to actually go to the next image. So now we add an event listener for the previous button. It's pretty simple, or sorry, this is the next button. It's pretty simple. We just set the last click to the current time and go to the next image. The previous image is a little bit trickier. We start out the same, set the last click time to the current time, and find the current image. Now to find the previous image, we have to go through a few checks. First off, we have to check the previous element sibling. This is whichever image is before, or if it's this image, the first image, it'll be our next button. We don't want to try to change to the next button if we are on the first image, So if that's the case, we want to go to the last image. That's all this check is doing here. And then toggle the classes as before. So there you have it. A fairly simple slider and just 40 or so lines of JavaScript and 30 lines of CSS. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.